Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to explore something I think we all struggle with from time to time, the psychology behind our decisions about money.
It's definitely something that impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. For this deep dive, we're going to be looking at Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. Have you had a chance to check it out?
Oh, yeah, I have. It's a great read. It really shines a light on those often hidden forces that drive our financial choices.
I totally agree. It's packed with insightful stories about why we behave the way we do when it comes to money.
Those stories are really what make it so relatable and thought-provoking.
Definitely. It reminds me of this tech executive I met back when I was working as a valet.
A valet. Wow, that's quite a contrast.
It was just a side hustle. But anyway, this guy was a genius, designed a key part for Wi-Fi routers in his 20s.
So you'd think he'd be a master with money.
Right. But he was always carrying around these wads of cash, bragging about his wealth. He even handed a coworker a few $1,000s to gamble with. It was such a strange mix of insecurity and financial immaturity.
That's a perfect illustration of what Housel talks about. Those soft skills often matter more than technical knowledge when it comes to building wealth. It's not just about understanding complex formulas.
Right.
It's about understanding the human emotions, greed, insecurity, optimism, all those things that drive our financial choices.
Yeah, okay, so it's more about behavior than just book smarts.
Yeah, exactly.
Housel also talks about how much our personal histories shape our worldview when it comes to money.
Absolutely.
How could someone who's never experienced a recession truly understand the fear of losing everything?
That's a great point. He uses John F. Kennedy as an example.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part.
Yeah, his family's wealth kind of shielded him from the Great Depression,
Right.
which actually became a point of contention during his presidential campaign. Voters were like, can he really understand our economic anxieties?
Makes you wonder how much our upbringings influence our views on risk and opportunity.
For sure.
Someone who came of age during a booming market might see stocks very differently from someone who lived through a crash.
Yeah, precisely. He also compares bond investor Bill Gross with his father.
Oh, right.
Bill saw bonds as wealth builders, while his father, who lived through inflation, saw them as potential wealth destroyers. It wasn't about one being right or wrong. It was about how their personal narratives shaped their perspectives.
It's so interesting how these early experiences can have such a lasting impact.
Definitely.
Which brings us to something that, on the surface, seems totally irrational. Lottery tickets.
Ah, yes, the lottery.
Yeah.
The ultimate game of chance.
The book points out that Americans spend more on lottery tickets than on movies, books, and sporting events combined.
It's incredible, isn't it?
And lower-income households spend way more than higher earners.
It is fascinating. Many of those same folks struggle with financial security.
Right.
But those choices make sense when you consider their experiences. Maybe they've witnessed firsthand how a small windfall can change lives, even if the odds are astronomically against them.
It's a powerful reminder that we can't judge financial decisions without understanding the individual's story.
I agree.
Speaking of things that challenge conventional wisdom, Housel also points out how new this whole concept of widespread retirement saving actually is.
He's right. The 401k, a cornerstone of retirement planning today, didn't even exist until 1978.
Wow, so we really are newbies at this.
Yeah, relatively speaking.
This next part was a real aha moment for me. The whole thing about luck and risk.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
And how much we tend to misunderstand their roles in financial success. We love to attribute success to skill, right? And failure to bad decisions.
It's so easy to overlook that invisible hand of luck.
It's like we're trying to control outcomes that are heavily influenced by chance.
We really do.
Like that story about Bill Gates attending the same high school as Ken Evans, this brilliant student who died young.
Yeah.
Imagine how different Gates' life might have been without that chance encounter and the opportunities it led to.
It's a powerful example. It highlights how even the most extraordinary success stories involve a blend of talent, hard work, and just being in the right place at the right time.
So blindly emulating someone else's winning strategy might not lead to the same results.
Exactly. What worked for one person might not work for another, not because of a lack of effort, but because that element of luck is impossible to replicate.
Right. So much of it seems to be outside of our control.
Yeah. He brings up examples like John D. Rockefeller and Cornelius Vanderbilt,
Oh, yeah.
whose law-breaking tactics were part of their success.
But could have just as easily led to ruin.
Exactly. It makes you think twice about those narratives we build around success and failure.
Yeah.
But then, how do we learn from these stories if luck and risk are so unpredictable?
That's a great question. It almost feels like a paradox.
It kind of is.
So how do we make sense of it all?
Well, Housel suggests focusing on broader patterns rather than extreme cases. The more common a pattern of success or failure is, the more likely it applies to the average person.
So instead of obsessing over that one lucky break, look for the repeatable actions that lead to success over time.
Right. It's about finding those universal truths that transcend individual circumstances.
Okay, that makes sense. Speaking of things we often misinterpret, let's talk about failure. It's inevitable, but the book argues that it can be a misleading teacher.
It can be, yeah,
Why is that? I mean, we usually learn from our mistakes, right?
of course. But failure can sometimes trick us into believing our decisions were inherently flawed when, maybe they just reflected the unpredictable nature of risk.
So even a well-calculated investment that goes south doesn't necessarily mean you made a bad call.
Exactly. External factors, market fluctuations, even plain bad luck can all play a role. The key, Housel says, is structuring your finances to withstand those setbacks, to keep you in the game. He contrasts two gamblers during the 1929 crash, Jesse Livermore, who made a killing, and Abraham Jermansky, who was seemingly driven to suicide by the same event.
It's a powerful illustration of the contrasting impacts of risk and luck.
It really is.
And it reminds me of something else from the book. A few years after the crash, Livermore, emboldened by his success, he kept making these bigger and bigger bets, eventually losing everything.
It's a classic example of how fleeting financial success can be.
Even for those who seem to thrive in chaos.
Yeah, it's a good lesson in humility.
It's a sobering reminder about the dangers of overconfidence.
It is.
Speaking of legendary investors, we can't talk about the psychology of money without talking about Warren Buffett.
The Oracle of Omaha.
What's interesting about Buffett isn't just his stock picks, but how long he's been in the game.
Right, that's key.
The book mentions he's been investing for 3/4 of a century.
That longevity is a huge factor in his success.
And that's the real secret to his extraordinary wealth, isn't it? The power of compounding over time.
Exactly.
Housel does this thought experiment comparing Buffett's actual net worth to what it would be if he had started investing later in life.
Oh, yeah, and the results are pretty mind-blowing.
Tell me about it. If Buffett had invested for like a typical time frame, his wealth would be a fraction of what it is today.
It's incredible to think about.
Wow, time really is the secret weapon.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets interesting. Buffett doesn't actually have the highest annual returns.
That's right. He introduces us to Jim Simons.
Ah, yes, Jim Simons. I've heard of him, but remind me.
He's a hedge fund manager who's achieved these, incredibly high returns.
Okay, yeah.
But over a much shorter period.
Man.
If Simons had been investing for as long as Buffett, the numbers would be astronomical.
It really makes you rethink the idea that chasing the highest possible returns is the best strategy.
Because consistent, pretty good returns, compounded over decades, can lead to astonishing wealth.
So it's the long game that really matters.
It is. The problem is the power of compounding isn't always easy to grasp. Housel uses the analogy of hard drive storage to illustrate this.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
From the 1950s to the 1990s, capacity grew slowly.
Okay.
But from the 1990s to today, it's exploded exponentially.
That's a brilliant comparison. It's like we can easily see the rapid progress in technology, but it's harder to visualize the same exponential growth in our investment.
Exactly.
So we need to shift our mindset to really grasp the power of those long-term gains.
Absolutely. And that's why patience and discipline are so crucial in investing.
Right. Speaking of seemingly boring assets, let's talk about cash.
Oh yeah, cash. The unloved stepchild of the investment world.
We often think of it as a low-return asset, almost a missed opportunity.
Right, like you're just leaving money on the table.
But Housel makes a compelling case for its value, especially during times of uncertainty.
He does, yeah.
So it's about more than just the potential return.
It is. Cash provides flexibility. And crucially, peace of mind. It prevents you from making those desperate, emotionally driven decisions when the market takes a dip.
Right. It's about having that buffer.
Exactly. He even suggested avoiding one forced stock sale during a downturn can do more for your returns than picking multiple winners.
It's like having that emergency fund, that cushion to weather the storm.
Exactly. And this ties into another key theme. Planning for the unplannable.
That sounds almost like a contradiction.
I know, right?
But how can you plan for something you can't predict?
It's not about predicting the future. It's about acknowledging that life rarely goes according to plan. Housel advocates for a margin of safety approach.
So building in buffers and contingencies to increase your odds of success.
Precisely. It's like having a plan B and maybe even a plan C.
It's like that saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Exactly. He then introduces this intriguing concept of the barbell personality.
Okay, that sounds interesting. What exactly does a barbell personality look like?
It's about balancing optimism about the future with a healthy paranoia about potential obstacles and risks.
So, hopeful about the long term, but also acutely aware of what could go wrong.
Exactly. You're planning for potential risks, but also remaining open to new opportunities. It's like having an emergency fund, but also being willing to invest in a promising new venture.
That makes a lot of sense. You need that balance. Cautious planning, but also willing to take calculated risks.
Right. You know, he even compares it to synaptic pruning in the brain,
Oh, wow, I remember that. That's fascinating.
where eliminating certain connections leads to greater cognitive function.
So sometimes those periods of loss and destruction are actually necessary for growth.
In our brains and in our financial lives.
So setbacks aren't always failures. They can be opportunities to learn and adapt.
That's a great way to think about it.
Which brings us back to embracing failure.
Ah, yes, failure. We try to avoid it, but it's an inevitable part of life.
He says failures are inevitable, especially in fields like investing.
Absolutely.
He uses the analogy of art dealers. They build vast portfolios, knowing most pieces will be of little value.
But a few winners drive the overall return.
It's a great way to reframe failure, not as incompetence, but as a necessary part of a winning strategy.
Right.
It's not about avoiding failure, it's about structuring our finances to withstand those setbacks and learning from the experience.
I agree. And this actually connects directly to his discussion of the tail-driven world.
The tail-driven world, can you remind me what that is again?
Sure. The idea is that a small percentage of events or investments often account for the majority of outcomes. It's like, think about the lottery. The average person might buy tickets for years with no luck,
Right.
but that single jackpot winner can completely skew how people perceive the odds.
So those rare occurrences, those outliers, have a disproportionate impact on how we see things.
Exactly. And this applies to everything from business and investing to technology and even career paths. We tend to focus on the average when it's those outliers that truly shape the landscape.
So how do we navigate a world where those rare, unpredictable events can have such a big impact?
That's the question, isn't it? It's about recognizing that we're not always in control, and that sometimes the best we can do is make informed decisions, manage our risk, and hope for the best. It's also about acknowledging that even with a carefully crafted strategy, sometimes things just come down to luck.
Right. There's a difference between acknowledging the role of luck and just giving up.
Absolutely.
So we have to find that balance between accepting what we can't control and taking responsibility for the choices we can make.
Right. You know, speaking of consistent, pretty good returns, Housel uses this hypothetical example of a woman named Sue who consistently invests just $1 per month from 1900 to 2019.
That doesn't sound like much.
It doesn't, does it?
Yeah.
But over time, even with those small investments, Sue builds significant wealth.
Wow, that's incredible. It really shows the power of consistency and long-term thinking.
It really does.
It's about playing the long game and trusting the process, even when it feels like everyone else is getting rich faster.
Which is often just an illusion, by the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Social media can really distort our perceptions.
It definitely can. So how do we stay motivated when the reward seems so far off?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It's so easy to get caught up in the short-term noise and lose sight of those long-term goals.
It is. And that's where finding investments you truly connect with comes into play.
You mean it's not just about cold, hard numbers?
Not necessarily. Housel argues that investing in things you genuinely care about can actually make you a better investor.
Because you're more likely to stick with it even when things get tough.
Exactly. He uses the example of Michael Burry, the investor from The Big Short, who bet against the housing market.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example. He was so driven by his convictions.
He was. He was driven by this deep conviction in his analysis, and that passion fueled his success.
So it's about having that emotional connection, that belief in what you're doing to weather the inevitable storms.
He even quotes Burry as saying that he enjoys the challenge and intellectual stimulation of investing.
So it's not just about making money, it's about finding meaning and enjoyment in the process.
Exactly. And speaking of seemingly counterintuitive advice, he also argues that making financial forecasts, even if they're wrong, can be valuable.
That seems a little strange. I mean, why would you rely on something that's likely to be inaccurate?
It's not about the accuracy, it's about the process. Making forecasts forces us to think critically about the future, to consider different possibilities.
So it's like creating a mental map of the financial landscape, even if the terrain turns out to be different than you anticipated.
Exactly. And this ties into something that can be a real challenge,
Yeah.
the allure of pessimism.
Oh, I definitely fall into that trap sometimes. Why do you think negative outlooks are so appealing?
Well, for one, we're kind of wired to focus on threats. It's a survival mechanism.
Right.
Plus, negative events tend to have a wider impact, getting more attention in the media.
Like that Russian professor who predicted the U.S. would collapse in 2008.
Exactly. It didn't happen, but it shows how those pessimistic forecasts, even if they're unfounded, can really capture the public imagination.
It's like we're drawn to those doomsday scenarios.
We are, but dwelling on the negative can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, you know?
We get so caught up in what could go wrong that we miss opportunities,
Yeah.
or we make decisions based on fear.
Exactly. That's why it's important to find that balance. It's not about being naive, but about recognizing the progress that has been made. Yes, there are risks, but also incredible opportunities.
It's about being a realist, acknowledging both the good and the bad. Speaking of perspectives, he talks about the power of narratives. You know, those stories we tell ourselves about the economy and the market.
Oh, those narratives are so powerful. They shape our behavior in ways we often don't even realize. He asks us to imagine an alien visiting Earth in 2007, then again in 2009.
Okay, so the alien would see the same physical world, but experience two completely different economic climates.
Exactly. The only thing that changed was the story. In 2007, it was all about stability and prosperity.
And then, bam, 2008 hits.
And in 2009, it's all fear and collapse. And that shift in narrative had a real-world impact, even though the underlying fundamentals hadn't changed that much.
It's a powerful reminder that our beliefs and expectations can really shape reality, especially when it comes to money. So how do we avoid being swayed by those narratives, those stories that might not even be true?
Well, Housel emphasizes the importance of room for error.
Isn't that just a fancy way of saying, have a backup plan?
It's more than that. It's about recognizing the inherent uncertainty of life and building strategies that can withstand those unexpected setbacks.
Okay.
He uses the analogy of blackjack card counting.
I'm listening.
Even skilled card counters, who can tilt the odds in their favor, know they can't bet everything on a single hand.
Right.
They have to account for the possibility of being wrong, even with a statistical advantage.
Right.
It's about building in that cushion, both financially and psychologically, to weather the inevitable storms.
So room for error is like a financial safety net.
Exactly.
And this ties into the idea of saving money, which is often seen as a chore, a sacrifice.
It is, especially in our consumerist culture.
Right.
But Housel reframes it as a choice that stems from humility, not deprivation.
Humility. I never thought of it that way.
Think about it. Those who can control their ego and resist the urge to keep up with the Joneses are often the ones who achieve financial security.
It's about aligning your spending with your values, not with those external pressures.
Exactly. And this leads to another key concept. Wealth is what you don't see.
Okay, explain that one.
It's not about those flashy cars or designer clothes. It's about the financial assets you haven't spent, the opportunities you haven't pursued, the experiences you've delayed.
So true wealth is about building that foundation, that security that allows you to make choices aligned with your values.
Precisely.
I love that.
And this brings us to the idea of being a serious possibilist.
Now, there's a phrase I haven't heard before. What does that even mean?
It's about acknowledging the uncertainty of the future while remaining open to exploring and exploiting opportunities.
So it's like balancing cautious optimism with a willingness to adapt, being prepared for different outcomes, but not letting fear paralyze you.
Exactly. It's about being agile, both mentally and financially, ready to seize those opportunities and adapt to those unexpected challenges.
I like that, being a serious possibilist. It's a good mindset to cultivate.
It is.
Speaking of unexpected changes, Housel talks about the end of history illusion. The end of history illusion. What's that all about?
It's the tendency to underestimate how much our values, goals, and preferences will change over time. We tend to think that who we are today is who we'll always be.
But that's rarely the case, is it? Our priorities shift, our interests evolve.
Exactly. And this illusion can lead to some pretty poor financial decisions. If we assume that our future selves will have the same desires, we might lock ourselves into choices we'll later regret.
So how do we plan for a future self we don't even know yet?
It's about building flexibility into our plans, recognizing that life is a journey, and our goals should evolve along with us. This also ties into the idea of avoiding sunk costs.
Some costs. Isn't that just some, like, economics jargon?
It's more than that. It's
Yeah.
that human tendency to cling to past investments or decisions, even when they're no longer serving us, simply because we've already put in the time, money, or effort.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that. It's so hard to let go of something you've invested in, even when it's clearly not working out.
It's a powerful psychological bias,
Mm.
and it can really prevent us from making those necessary changes. Housel encourages us to view financial decisions as fluid, adaptable, allowing for those course corrections.
So it's about letting go of the past and recognizing that what made sense yesterday might not make sense today.
Exactly.
It takes courage to admit we were wrong and make a change, especially when it comes to money.
It does.
And sometimes those changes need to happen on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
He uses the example of General Electric.
Oh, yeah, GE. Once a titan of American industry.
It's almost a cautionary tale, isn't it?
It is, in a way. For decades, they were a Wall Street darling, exceeding expectations, delivering impressive returns. But in the 2000s, things started to unravel. The 2008 financial crisis hit their financing division hard, and their bets on oil and energy backfired.
Things can change so quickly.
They can. Their stock plummeted, and their CEO faced intense criticism. It shows how even the most successful companies can stumble.
It's a reminder that even brilliant leaders are human, and they're operating in a world where unforeseen events can derail the best-laid plans.
Exactly. He highlights the challenges of navigating these, sprawling bureaucracies, responding to short-term investors, and just dealing with unpredictable events. It makes you realize that we often judge these CEOs from the outside.
Right, without understanding the pressures they face or the difficult decisions they have to make.
Exactly.
It's easy to armchair quarterback when you're not the one in the hot seat.
It is. GE's story also emphasizes the importance of avoiding single points of failure. When we become overly reliant on one company, one asset, or one source of income,
Right.
we become vulnerable. Think about it like diversifying your investment portfolio.
But applying that principle to other areas of your life. So it's about spreading your risk, having backup plans, and building a life that can weather those inevitable storms.
Precisely. Speaking of risk, let's talk about one of the most fundamental concepts in investing: risk and return.
It's a simple idea, but it seems to trip people up all the time.
It does, doesn't it? So many investors want high returns without accepting the inherent volatility that comes with them.
It's like wanting to win the lottery without buying a ticket.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of buying a car.
Okay, I like analogies. Lay it on me.
You can pay full price for a new car, get a cheaper used car, or try to steal one.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Most people understand that stealing a car is a bad idea. But when it comes to investing, they try to find ways to get the returns without paying the price.
They chase those hot stocks, jump in and out of the market, trying to time the ups and downs without really understanding the risks.
Exactly. But the market doesn't reward those who try to cheat the system.
So you have to be willing to pay the price for those potential rewards.
You do.
There's no free lunch in investing.
There isn't. Volatility and uncertainty. That's the price of admission for achieving those higher returns.
I like that analogy. It's like paying an entrance fee to a theme park. You can stay home and avoid the cost, but you'll miss out on the rides and the excitement.
And by trying to avoid that fee, those investors often end up paying double.
How so?
They miss out on potential gains during the good times,
Oh, I see.
and they incur losses when they panic and sell during those downturns.
They cut off their nose to spite their face.
Exactly. So the real skill is learning to ride those waves of volatility
To manage that risk.
and stick with your plan, even when things get uncomfortable.
It's about having that long-term perspective.
Right.
But it's also important to understand that not all investors are playing the same game, right? They have different goals, different time horizons.
That's a really important point. The price you're willing to pay for an investment depends on your individual circumstances and goals.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about Google stock. What's a fair price to pay for a share today?
It's a constantly moving target.
It is. But if you have a 30-year time horizon, you might be willing to pay more than someone who needs to access their money in the next few years.
Right, because their timelines are completely different.
Exactly. This difference in perspective can lead to seemingly irrational behavior.
Like the dot-com bubble of the 1990s.
Exactly. Investors were paying these ridiculous prices for internet companies with no earnings.
It seemed crazy at the time, but I guess to those caught up in the frenzy, it made sense because they believed the future potential justified those high prices.
They were playing a different game betting on long-term potential rather than short-term profits.
It's like a game of musical chairs. The music stops and everyone scrambles for a seat, even though there aren't enough to go around.
That's a great analogy.
So how do we avoid getting caught up in those bubbles, those moments of collective irrationality?
It's about defining your own game, understanding your own goals and time horizon, and not letting yourself be swayed by the actions of others.
It's about staying true to your own investment strategy and recognizing that what works for someone else might not work for you.
Exactly. Everyone's financial journey is unique.
This conversation really highlights how much psychology impacts our decisions with money.
It really does.
It's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding ourselves, our biases, and how those things influence the choices we make. I'm curious to dig even deeper into this.
Me too. There's so much more to uncover.
Where do we go from here?
Well, we left off talking about how much our psychology influences our decisions about money. Building on that, Housel talks about how we tend to create complete narratives, even when we only have like an incomplete view of the world.
So we fill in the gaps with our own assumptions and biases.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a natural human tendency, right? We seek explanations, we want to make sense of things. But those narratives can be based on limited information.
Right.
And a desire to confirm what we already believe.
It's like we choose to see only the evidence that supports our viewpoint, even if it's not the whole picture.
Right. And this can be especially dangerous with money.
Oh, I can see that.
Like, if you believe the market is going to crash,
Yeah.
you'll find evidence everywhere, even if the data suggests otherwise.
It's like you become blind to anything that contradicts your narrative.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we avoid falling into that trap? Housel stresses the importance of recognizing the limits of our own knowledge, being open to challenging our own narratives, seeking out different perspectives, being willing to change our minds when presented with new information.
It's about having that intellectual humility to admit we don't have all the answers.
Right?
Which is tough because we often crave certainty, especially when it comes to our finances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this desire for control can sometimes lead us astray. Housel uses this interesting example from the world of medicine, the evolution of patient consent.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. How does patient consent relate to personal finance?
Well, it's about recognizing that financial well-being is a personal journey,
Yeah.
just like health decisions.
You need to be an active participant, not just blindly following someone else's advice.
Exactly. But it wasn't always this way. Back in the early 20th century, doctors often made treatment decisions without, fully informing patients or obtaining their consent.
That's wild. It seems almost unthinkable now.
It was a different time. Doctors were seen as the experts.
Right.
Patients were expected to just defer to their judgment.
It sounds almost paternalistic, like the doctor knows best.
Exactly. But things began to shift in the 1970s. There was this landmark book that came out.
Oh, what was it called?
I can't recall the name offhand, but it argued that patients have a right to be fully informed and involved in their own care.
So a movement toward patient empowerment.
Precisely. It was driven by several factors: advances in medical technology, a greater awareness of patient rights, and just the recognition that the best medical decision isn't always one size fits all.
It's fascinating how this shift in healthcare mirrors a similar movement in personal finance.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. Like, just as patients were once expected to blindly trust their doctors, many people still rely on financial advisors without fully understanding the risks.
Or even their own goals.
Right. So it's about becoming financially literate,
Yeah.
understanding the basics, feeling empowered to make your own choices.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your financial well-being.
I like that. Taking ownership.
Yeah.
Now, let's get back to the power of compounding.
Ah, yes, compounding, the eighth wonder of the world.
It's the snowball effect, right? Small amounts growing exponentially over time.
Exactly. But even though it seems so simple, Housel argues that most people still underestimate its power.
Why is that? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me.
Well, it's because we think linearly,
Okay.
but compounding works exponentially. It's not always intuitive. He uses this great analogy of a lily pad.
A lily pad.
Yeah, imagine a lily pad in a pond. It doubles in size every day.
Yeah.
And it takes, let's say, 30 days for it to cover the whole pond. So the question is, when is the pond half covered?
I'm going to guess day 15.
It's actually day 29.
Wow, that's incredible. It really shows how that exponential growth can kind of sneak up on you.
Exactly. That's why patience and persistence are so crucial in investing. It's about playing the long game and trusting the process. Speaking of the long game, investing can be an emotional roller coaster.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement when the market's soaring.
And then panic when it's crashing.
Exactly. So how do we manage those ups and downs?
Well, Housel's advice: manage those emotions. Avoid making impulsive decisions driven by fear or greed. Stick to your plan.
So it's about having that long-term perspective,
Yeah.
riding out those inevitable market fluctuations.
And not letting that short-term noise derail your goals.
Right, right. Don't get distracted by the day-to-day drama.
He even suggests thinking of market volatility as a fee, not a fine.
Oh, okay, I like that. A fee, not a fine. So it's the price you pay for the potential of higher return.
Exactly. It's like paying for a gym membership.
Uh,
You might not always feel like going, but you know those long-term benefits are worth it.
it's about making that commitment to your financial fitness.
I like that. Financial fitness. But even with the best plan and a long-term mindset, there's always that element of the unknown, right? Predicting the future is practically impossible,
It is. And Housel actually argues that most financial forecasts are useless.
even potentially harmful.
Why would relying on forecasts be a bad thing? Don't we need some idea of what's coming to make informed decisions?
Well, the problem is that forecasts are often based on incomplete data and the biases of the people making them. Even when a forecast is accurate, the timing can be completely off.
So we might correctly predict that the market will go up, but have no idea when that'll actually happen.
Exactly. Trying to time the market based on forecasts is like trying to catch a falling knife.
That's a scary image. So what's the alternative?
Well, instead of trying to predict the future, Housel suggests focusing on building robust plans that can withstand a range of outcomes.
So it's about having that margin of safety, diversifying your investments, and being prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly. He argues that the best way to deal with uncertainty is not to try to eliminate it, but to embrace it.
Okay.
Embrace the unknown.
Yeah.
I like that.
Speaking of things we often misinterpret, let's talk about anchoring.
Anchoring. I'm not familiar with that term.
It's a psychological bias where we rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive,
Yeah.
even if it's irrelevant or misleading.
Oh, I've definitely experienced that. Like, if you see a house listed for a certain price, you might anchor to that number, even if it's way overpriced.
Exactly. That initial number can really distort your perception of value.
It's like you get stuck on that first impression.
We do. And Housel explains that anchoring can influence everything from salary negotiations to, well, buying a house, like you said.
So how do we avoid falling prey to this bias?
Awareness is key. Just be aware of its influence. Seek out multiple sources of information and challenge your own assumptions. Don't just take things at face value. Right. Do your research. Think critically.
Exactly. Don't let those initial anchors weigh you down.
So much of this comes back to questioning those initial assumptions, those narratives we build in our heads. And speaking of things that can distort our perceptions, let's talk about social comparison. It's such a powerful force, especially when it comes to money.
It really is. Housel argues that it's one of the biggest drivers of spending.
And one of the biggest obstacles to building wealth.
Absolutely. It's that constant pressure to keep up with the Joneses.
To have what others have, even if it means sacrificing your own financial goals.
Right. And social media has only made this worse, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're constantly bombarded with images of wealth and, these perfect lives. It can make it so hard to resist the temptation to spend beyond our means.
It can. It's a recipe for unhappiness.
Yeah.
You're always chasing after something that's just out of reach.
So how do we break free from this cycle of comparison? It's something I definitely struggle with.
Well, Housel suggests defining your own values and goals and focusing on building a life that aligns with those, not with the expectations of others.
So it's about finding fulfillment in things that truly matter to you, not in those fleeting material possessions or, social status.
He argues that true wealth isn't about having the most stuff. It's about having that freedom and flexibility to live a life that is true to yourself.
That's a powerful idea. It's about defining success on your own terms.
It is. Speaking of breaking free from conventional thinking, Housel has this interesting idea that embracing risk can actually lead to greater security.
That's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? We're always told to avoid risk, to play it safe.
Right. But he argues that a certain amount of risk is essential for achieving our financial goals.
It's like that saying, no risk, no reward.
Exactly. The key is to differentiate between, good risk and bad risk.
Okay, so how do you tell the difference?
Well, investing in a well-diversified portfolio, that's good risk.
Okay.
Borrowing money to buy a luxury car you can't afford, that's bad risk.
So it's not about avoiding risk altogether. It's about understanding it, managing it, and taking those calculated risks that align with your goals.
Precisely. He argues that our aversion to risk often stems from a fear of loss.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
But by focusing too much on avoiding losses, we can miss out on opportunities for growth.
So it's about finding that balance between protecting what you have and being open to new possibilities.
Exactly. Now, I know we discussed luck earlier, but I think it's worth revisiting
Okay, why revisit it now?
because it's easy to forget how much of both success and failure is influenced by factors outside our control.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like the universe is just messing with us.
It does, doesn't it?
Mm.
We like to take credit for our wins
Of course.
and blame those external factors for our losses.
It's that classic self-serving bias.
Exactly. But the reality is that chance plays a much bigger role than we often admit. Think about flipping a coin. It's entirely possible to get 10 heads in a row, even though the odds are tiny.
That's a good point. It's easy to focus on the outcome and assume it reflects skill or strategy, when sometimes it's just pure luck.
Yeah, you see this in the financial markets all the time.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Some investors make a fortune through sheer luck.
While others make all the right moves but still lose money.
It happens. So Housel stresses the importance of recognizing the role of chance,
Okay.
and avoiding those sweeping conclusions based on, small samples of data.
It's about acknowledging that we don't have as much control as we'd like to think.
We don't. But that doesn't mean we should just give up and let fate decide.
Yeah.
It's about making those informed decisions, managing our risk, and accepting that sometimes things just come down to luck.
It's that balance again, taking
Yeah.
responsibility for our choices,
Yeah.
but also accepting the things we can't control.
Exactly. Speaking of acknowledging limitations, he has this interesting idea about financial planning. The most important part is planning for the plan to not go according to plan.
Wait, what? Isn't the whole point of a plan to create a roadmap for the future?
It is. But life is unpredictable.
Oh, tell me about it.
No matter how carefully we plan, unforeseen events are bound to happen.
It's like that saying, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy.
Right. There are always going to be those curveballs,
Yes.
job losses, unexpected expenses, market crashes, you name it.
So how do we plan for the unplannable?
That is the million-dollar question. Well, Housel argues that the key is to build flexibility and adaptability into your plans. Don't create this rigid roadmap.
Right.
Have a margin of safety, diversify your investments, and be prepared to adjust as needed.
So it's about having that mental and financial agility to navigate those inevitable challenges.
He suggests that the best way to plan for the unexpected is to expect the unexpected.
Okay, expect the unexpected. I like that.
Yeah, let's talk about something that kind of goes against our consumerist culture. The idea that frugality is a virtue, even when you're wealthy.
It's definitely a countercultural idea.
It is.
We're constantly bombarded with these messages to, buy more, spend more, upgrade our lifestyle.
Right, bigger is always better.
But Housel argues that frugality is about more than just saving money.
It is. It's about aligning your spending with your values, finding fulfillment in things that truly matter, not in those material possessions.
So it's not about deprivation or penny pinching. It's about making those conscious choices about how you use your resources.
Exactly. He argues that those who resist the allure of, excessive consumption are more likely to achieve both financial security and personal contentment.
It's about having the freedom to choose how you live,
Yeah.
rather than being trapped by the need to constantly acquire more stuff.
It's about recognizing that true wealth often lies in what you don't spend.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. Speaking of mental traps, we've got to talk about confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, it's that tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe,
Even if it's wrong.
even if it's wrong. It's one of the most pervasive biases in, all of human thinking.
We all do it, right? It's so easy to fall into that trap of seeing only what we want to see.
We do. And with finances, it can be disastrous.
No, I can imagine.
If you believe a particular stock is a good investment, you're going to focus on the positive news.
And ignore any red flags.
You'll cherry-pick information to fit your narrative, which can lead to some pretty bad decisions, chasing after the next hot stock without really understanding the risks.
Right. So how do we avoid this? How do we make sure we're not just fooling ourselves?
Well, Housel's advice: be aware of the bias, actively seek out diverse perspectives, and be willing to change your mind when presented with new information.
It's about being open to being wrong,
It is.
challenging those assumptions,
Yeah.
and constantly learning and evolving.
Now let's talk about another idea that flips the script on traditional wealth. Housel says True wealth isn't about having the most money. It's about having the most options.
So it's not about your net worth, but about your freedom and flexibility.
Exactly. It's about having the ability to make choices, to pursue opportunities, to live life on your own terms.
It's about having the resources to create a life that aligns with your values and brings you joy, without being limited by those financial constraints.
He argues that the pursuit of wealth should be driven not by a desire for, status or material possessions, but by a desire for autonomy and self-determination.
That's a powerful idea. It's about having agency over your own life.
It is. Speaking of powerful tools, Housel talks about visualization.
Yeah. Visualization. I've heard about that, but I'm not sure I really understand how it works.
Well, visualization is a really powerful technique for achieving any goal,
Including financial ones.
including financial ones. It's
Yeah.
about creating this clear mental picture of what you want to achieve.
So, like, creating a mental movie of your ideal future.
Yeah, complete with all the details, the emotions, the sense of accomplishment,
So you're essentially programming your subconscious mind to seek out opportunities.
and to make those decisions that support those goals.
It's like setting that internal compass that guides your actions and keeps you moving in the right direction.
That's a great way to put it. Now, here's another one of those paradoxes that Housel loves. He argues that one of the best ways to become wealthy is to embrace the possibility of being wrong.
Okay, that sounds a little counterintuitive. Aren't we supposed to strive for perfection to avoid making mistakes?
Well, no one has a perfect track record. Even the most successful investors, entrepreneurs, they make mistakes.
So it's not about avoiding those mistakes altogether. It's about managing the consequences.
Exactly. It's about having that margin of safety, diversifying your investments, being willing to cut your losses when necessary.
It's about accepting that you're not going to win every time.
Right. He points out that many successful people have a high tolerance for failure. They see it as a learning opportunity, not a sign of weakness.
So it's not about being reckless. It's about having the courage to experiment, to take risks, and to learn from your mistakes.
Now, let's talk about something that's often in short supply these days. Patience.
It's true. We live in a world of instant gratification. We want everything right now.
Right. But Housel reminds us that building wealth is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires that long-term perspective and a willingness to delay gratification.
The tortoise and the hare, right?
Exactly. The magic of compounding, it takes time. Those who resist chasing those quick wins and focus on the long game are more likely to succeed.
It's about having that discipline to stick to your plan, even when the results aren't immediate.
Which brings us to a distinction that can be so easy to blur. The difference between price and value.
Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. What's the catch?
It is a simple concept, but it's crucial for making sound financial decisions. We often get caught up in the hype, the excitement.
And forget that the price we see isn't always a reflection of the true value.
Exactly. Housel reminds us that the market is often driven by emotion, by speculation,
Right.
causing prices to swing wildly from the actual value of, say, a company or an asset.
So successful investors are the ones who can spot those discrepancies, right?
Yeah, buying when the price is low,
And selling when it's high.
regardless of what everyone else is doing.
It's about having that independent thinking, doing your research, and not getting swept up in that herd mentality.
Precisely. And speaking of redefining success, he also suggests that true success might not be about how much money you make,
Oh, interesting. So how does he define it?
but about how much time you have.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
It is. It's a shift from focusing on material wealth to focusing on freedom and fulfillment. Housel argues that our time is our most valuable asset,
Okay.
and true success lies in using that time to pursue the things that matter most to us.
So it's not about accumulating wealth for wealth's sake. It's about creating a life where you have the freedom to choose how you spend your time.
To work on those projects that excite you, spend time with loved ones, travel the world.
It's about having those resources to create a life that aligns with your values and brings you joy without being chained to a job you hate just to pay the bills.
Exactly. And that's where the power of belief comes in.
Belief. How does that relate to money?
Well, Housel argues that our beliefs about money can actually have a huge impact on our financial outcomes.
Because our beliefs shape our actions. Like if you believe you're capable of building wealth, you're more likely to make choices that support that belief.
Exactly. And conversely, if you believe you're destined to struggle financially, you might unconsciously sabotage your
It's
efforts.
like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right, you believe it, so you act in ways that make it come true.
So how do we change those beliefs if they're not serving us?
Well, he emphasizes that we can choose to adopt more empowering beliefs about money. It's about recognizing that our thoughts create our reality.
Of course, it's easier said than done to just change your beliefs, but it's a powerful idea to keep in mind.
It is. Speaking of things that can hold us back, we've got to talk about the role of emotions in our financial decisions.
Oh, emotions. The wild card in the game of money.
Right. We like to think of money as this purely rational subject.
Right.
But the truth is, our emotions play a huge role in how we manage our finances.
It's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of a bull market or panic during a downturn.
Exactly. Emotions like fear and greed can lead us to make some pretty impulsive decisions that we later regret.
Yeah, like when you're fearful, you might sell your investments at a loss.
Even if the fundamentals are still strong.
Or when you're feeling greedy, you might chase after those risky investments, hoping to get rich quick.
Exactly. So it's about becoming aware of those emotional triggers and learning to manage them effectively.
It's about developing that emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
learning to recognize when your emotions are clouding your judgment.
And making decisions based on logic and reason, not on those fleeting feelings.
It's easier said than done,
Right.
especially when you're watching your portfolio plummet.
It is, but it's crucial to keep a cool head and not let those emotions drive your decisions.
Absolutely. And sometimes taking a step back and just focusing on the present moment can be helpful.
Oh, that's a good point.
Wait, isn't that kind of the opposite of what we're supposed to do with financial planning? Aren't we supposed to be thinking about the future?
Well, of course, planning for the future is important.
Right.
But Housel argues that focusing too much on the future can make us miss out on the joys and opportunities of the present.
So it's about finding that balance between planning for tomorrow and living fully today.
Exactly. He suggests that true financial security comes not just from having a big nest egg,
Right.
but from having a life that is rich in experiences, relationships, and personal fulfillment.
So it's about creating a life that is meaningful and joyful, both now and in the future.
Right. And a big part of that is understanding the role of trust.
Oh, yeah, trust. That's essential for all sorts of financial transactions, right? We need to trust banks, financial advisors, even our own judgment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when that trust is broken, it can lead to fear, anxiety, and ultimately bad decisions.
It's like if you don't trust your financial advisor, you might hesitate to invest, even if it's in your best interest.
Right. Or if you don't trust yourself to make those sound financial choices,
You might sabotage your own efforts to build wealth.
it can become this vicious cycle.
So how do we build that trust, both in others and in ourselves?
Well, Housel emphasizes honesty, transparency, and accountability. It's about communicating openly, keeping your promises, and admitting when you've made a mistake.
So it's about building those solid foundations of integrity, both in our personal and financial lives.
Exactly. Now, here's an idea that challenges the traditional view of financial planning. Housel says the most important decision isn't about how much you save, but how you spend it.
That's an interesting perspective. We usually think of saving as the key to financial success.
Well, saving is important, of course.
Right.
But Housel argues that true wealth lies not in the size of your bank account, but in the experiences you create, the people you help, and the legacy you leave behind.
So it's not just about accumulation, it's about impact.
It is. It's about using your resources to make a difference.
It's about viewing money as a tool to create positive change, not just a means to an end.
He suggests that we should consciously choose to spend our money in ways that align with our values and our vision for the future.
It's about aligning your spending with your values, using your resources to create the life you want, both for yourself and for others.
This whole conversation has really highlighted the emotional and psychological side of money.
It has. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers,
Yeah.
and forget that our financial decisions are often driven by these deeper, less conscious factors.
Absolutely. Speaking of powerful emotional tools, let's talk about gratitude.
Gratitude. What does that have to do with money?
Well, Housel explains how gratitude can actually shift our perspective from scarcity to abundance.
So when you're grateful for what you have, you're less likely to feel deprived, less likely to focus on what you're lacking.
Exactly. And this can lead to more mindful financial decisions.
Like when you're grateful for the money you have, you're less likely to waste it on those frivolous things,
It's about appreciating what you have.
rather than always striving for more.
Exactly. And that brings us to self-discipline,
Yeah.
something that's essential for achieving any goal, especially financial ones.
Self-discipline is the key to resisting those temptations, staying focused,
Yeah.
following through on your commitments.
Even when it's hard.
Exactly. Building wealth requires making sacrifices, delaying gratification, and resisting those impulsive urges.
So it's about saying no to that fancy latte
Or that new gadget.
and yes to your long-term goals.
It's like building a muscle.
It is. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
And like any muscle, self-discipline can be developed through practice. So it's
Exactly.
about building those good habits.
Yeah, like setting a budget
Tracking your spending.
and making those consistent choices that align with your goals.
Precisely. Speaking of challenging traditional notions of success, Housel suggests that true wealth might be measured not by how much you accumulate, but by the impact you have on the world.
It's not about the size of your bank account. What about the legacy you leave behind?
So it's about using your financial resources to support those causes you care about
Yeah, to help those in need.
and to create a better future for generations to come.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that money is a tool that can be used to amplify your impact.
I really like that idea. It shifts the focus from personal gain to making a positive contribution.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about the role of emotions, self-discipline, gratitude, even generosity. What other psychological aspects of money does Housel explore?
Well, he talks about forgiveness, which might seem like a kind of odd topic for a finance book.
Forgiveness
Yeah,
in relation to money.
right. He emphasizes the importance of forgiving ourselves for past financial mistakes.
We all make mistakes.
We do.
It's part of being human. But it's so easy to get caught up in the regret, the self-blame.
Exactly. And dwelling on those past mistakes can prevent us from making, wise choices in the present.
So it's about learning from those mistakes, letting go of the guilt, and focusing on making better decisions moving forward.
He argues that forgiveness isn't about condoning bad behavior.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we all make mistakes. And
Yeah.
we all have the capacity to learn and grow.
It's about giving yourself permission to move on and create a better financial future.
Exactly. And speaking of creating a better future, he also talks about the power of habits.
Oh yeah, habits. We've all heard that saying, habits make the man. But what makes them so crucial in personal finance?
Well, Housel explains that good financial habits, like, saving regularly or living below your means, can lead to long-term success, while bad habits, like impulsive spending or racking up debt, can lead to financial struggles.
So it's about creating those positive patterns that support your financial well-being.
Yeah. He suggests making those good habits automatic.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, create systems and routines that make it easier to do the right thing. And surround yourself with people who support your financial goals.
So it's about creating an environment that encourages those good financial habits.
Exactly. It's not just about willpower. It's about creating a supportive environment.
Which leads perfectly into the idea of our environment's impact on our financial decisions.
Oh, it's incredible how much our surroundings can influence our behavior, including our financial habits.
Like if you're constantly hanging out with people who spend lavishly, it's easy to get caught up in that lifestyle, even if it's not sustainable for you.
It is.
Yeah.
But if you surround yourself with people who are financially responsible,
Yeah.
you're more likely to adopt those habits yourself.
So it's not just about individual willpower. It's about creating that supportive environment that encourages those good financial habits.
Exactly. He suggests being mindful of the influences around us, seeking out those positive role models and just making conscious choices about who and what we allow into our lives.
That's like curating your social circle to support your financial well-being.
That's a great way to put it. Now, let's talk about another concept that challenges traditional notions of financial success. The idea that true wealth is actually measured by how much we give away.
So it's not about what we accumulate, but what we contribute.
Housel believes that giving back to others, whether through charitable donations or just, simply being kind and compassionate,
Right.
can bring a level of fulfillment that those material possessions never can.
It's about recognizing that true wealth lies not in what we keep for ourselves, but in what we share with others.
Exactly. And that brings us to the importance of aligning our financial decisions with our values.
Our values. Okay, how do those come into play when we're talking about money?
Well, Housel believes that our spending, saving, investing should reflect what's truly important to us.
It's about making sure that our financial choices are congruent with our core beliefs and our vision for the future.
Exactly. By aligning our finances with our values, we can create a life that is both financially secure and personally fulfilling.
This conversation has been so eye-opening. It's made me realize how much of our financial well-being is tied to understanding ourselves,
Yeah.
our psychology, and those often hidden factors that shape our decisions.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from the psychology of money.
Right. It's not just about mastering those technical aspects of finance.
It's about understanding the human side of money.
Our emotions, our biases, those often irrational impulses that can lead us astray.
Exactly. Because once you understand those psychological forces at play, you can start to make more informed, intentional choices.
You can start to create a healthier, more fulfilling relationship with money.
I love that. A healthier relationship with money.
It's not about demonizing money or putting it on a pedestal.
It's about finding that balance.
Right. It's about recognizing its power
Yeah.
and using it wisely to create the life we want.
And I think that's what Housel does so brilliantly in this book. He helps us understand the psychology behind our decisions so that we can become more conscious and intentional with our money.
This deep dive into the psychology of money has been really fantastic. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for approaching my finances, not just from a practical standpoint, but from a psychological one as well.
Me too. I
Yeah.
always learn something new every time I revisit this book.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey and for sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the psychology of money. Remember, the journey towards financial well-being is ongoing. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep that curiosity alive. And don't be afraid to challenge those old money scripts that might be holding you back.
That's such great advice. We all have the power to change our relationship with money and create a more abundant and fulfilling life. Thanks for listening.